Welcome into Texans Today. I'm your host, Jeremy Chuggs, and today I'm looking at the Houston Texans draft big board, one that I created, the top 15 players the Texans could take in round one. I tried to kind of do a mix of guys who I think could fall to that 23 pick, who also I hope fall to that 23 pick, and what the Texans need and who I think they might draft based on the latest Texans news and rumors that I've heard. But before we get started, I have a quick fun question for you. Not a huge history compared to other teams, but in Texans history, who do you think is the biggest draft bust? Let me know down in the comment section. I just threw down a couple names that I was thinking of. I know Kevin Johnson, the cornerback, never really panned out, the first round pick. Kenyon Green, who's still on the roster. I don't know if he bounces back this year or how he's going to be able to perform. Did not look good at all this past preseason. He might be one. He was a first-round pick as well. I know maybe not a draft bust. I don't think it's fair because he's not a first-round pick. But I know me personally, I thought Jalen Strong was him. I thought he was going to be amazing. He might go into that list. Lonnie Johnson, the quarterback, and then Ross Blacklock, the defensive tackle. If I forgot anybody, or if you're thinking of any other Texans draft bust, let me know down in the comment section who you think is the biggest draft bust in Texans history. As we look at the Texans round one big board, starting with Jackson Powers Johnson. Now, I know the Texans, they drafted Juice Scruggs and Jarrett Patterson this past year, but Jackson Powers Johnson has been getting a lot of interest after his performance in the Senior Bowl. The best center in this year's draft. If he's on the board, could be a tantalizing pick for the Texans to shore up that offensive line. I'm impartial to the big boys. I used to play offensive line, so I wouldn't mind it, but he's number 15 on my list because I think the Texans have some other needs that are there. Coming in at number 14 is Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver from LSU. Now, I don't know if he falls down this list, but I've seen a couple of mocks where he's being picked at 28, 29. Brian Thomas, if he's there at 23 and the Texans didn't sign a big-name wide receiver, he could definitely be a name I could see the Texans drafting in round one. And whenever I kind of think back in Texans history of guys they've drafted in the 20s, multiple times they've drafted wide receiver. DeAndre Hopkins, Will Fuller. If Brian Thomas is there for them in the 20s in the first round, that could be a name the Texans could consider in round one. This next one, Cooper DeJean, cornerback, safety from Iowa. And I know, let's get past all the jokes before we get started. I get it. He's a white defensive back going into the NFL, but he's actually really versatile. He played safety, he played cornerback, did both of them extremely well on an Iowa defense that was considered by many to be like top 10, top 15 in college football. Cooper DeJean could fit a role for this Houston Texans defense, playing at the cornerback spot opposite of Derek Stingley, or being a nickel guy, being a safety. He is very versatile. If he's there in round one, I would love the Texans to go ahead and select him because at the end of the day, he's a really good player. Next up is another cornerback who I hope falls to the Texans. It's Nate Wiggins, cornerback from Clemson. Arguably one of the top three corners alongside Cooper DeJean. Could he fall to the Houston Texans? Now, these corners, I mean, it's really hard to kind of say who's going to go first, second, and third because I've seen all the different scenarios in this in mock drafts. But if Nate Wiggins is able to fall to the Texans at the cornerback spot, I would love that. Now, this next name, I've heard a lot of you saying, and I would love for the Texans to take a look at him. I think he'll be there at 23, and that's Kamren Kinchens, safety from the U from Miami. We know about you. We know about safeties that come out of the U. Could he be the next great one to come out? The tape really shows that, and his numbers show that as well. 59 tackles, 5 interceptions, 5 pass breakups this past year for Kinchens in that Hurricanes defense. I really would love the Texans to take a look at Kinchens. I think he'll be there. The safeties in this draft, at least before the combine, before all the pro days, have kind of been put to the wayside. A lot of people are thinking there won't even be a safety selected in the first round. But if the Texans are there at 23 and the top safety in the draft is there on the board, that's an area of need for the Texans this offseason. Could they look to splurge and go for a safety in the first round? Kamren Kinchens could be a name to keep an eye out on. Now, I would say Kinchens is one of those guys who's a little bit underrated in the draft process so far. And I know a lot of you have kind of told me, hey, you should look at this guy. Hey, why aren't you talking about this guy? So this is your chance right now. Get in the comment section and let me know an underrated draft prospect that we should look more into. I'm really interested to see what Texans fans have to say, who y'all are looking at for the Texans to draft, because at the end of the day, we're all Texans fans. We all have an opinion on our team. We all love this team, so I want to hear from you folks at home. Go down in the comment section right now and let me know, who should I be looking more into in this draft process? This is going to be the pinned comment on today's video, so you get hit with the ad break. Perfect timing. Go down and let me know who we should look at more in this draft process. Coming in at number 10, it's Taliese Fuaga, offensive lineman from Oregon State. He is mean, he is nasty, and he is a great lineman. He can play multiple positions, offensive tackle, offensive guard. I wouldn't mind the Texans taking an offensive lineman in the first round. I'll say that once again, because we saw what happened to the Texans offensive line this past year. It got decimated. You can never have enough depth at the offensive line position. And the one thing is, in free agency, you rarely see really good linemen hit free agency. So if one of these top linemen fall to you in round 1, I would not mind the Texans taking them whatsoever. Coming in at number 9 is Jared Verse, defensive end from Florida State. And I mean, he is an athletic specimen. 6'4", 260 pounds, was a great pass rusher for Florida State. I mean, if he's there in round 1, I wouldn't mind this pick either. None of these guys on this list I would mind the Texans picking. Obviously, they're on my big board, but Jared Verse is one guy who, if the Texans aren't able to re-sign Jonathan Grenard and they're looking for another defensive end to fill that role, Jared Verse would be a great selection in round 1 for your Houston Texans. Coming in at number 8 is Byron Murphy II. Now, he's been getting a lot of early round 1 buzz. I mean, I've seen a couple mocks of him going in the top 15. So that's why I have him a little bit lower on my list. I don't know if he necessarily makes it to 23, but if he does, my goodness, I would love the Texans to run that draft card up and get Byron Murphy. They absolutely need defensive tackle help, and Byron Murphy has really shown that he can be a good pass rusher from the interior. 5 sacks this past year, 29 tackles for the University of Texas. Does a lot of different things for that Texans defense, is able to hold up a lot of blockers. I know 6'1" doesn't sound very big, but he is a very stout 6'1". Byron Murphy comes in at number 8 on my Texans round 1 big board. Coming in at number 7, Latu, defensive end from UCLA. Another guy, kind of like I said about Jared Verse. If the Texans aren't able to re-sign Jonathan Grenard, Latu could be an option there. I think he slides a little bit more than Verse does, so that's why I have him a little bit higher on my big board, because I think there's a better chance of him falling to the Texans. But if Latu's there, I would love for the Texans to snag the kid out of UCLA, just like this next guy, another Florida State guy, wide receiver Keon Coleman. I know I talked about Brian Thomas Jr. earlier, but Keon Coleman is that next guy up, in my opinion, and absolutely showed out. I know the numbers don't really jump off the page for you, but 50 receptions, 658 yards, 11 touchdowns for Keon Coleman. Also had a great year the year prior at Michigan State. Keon Coleman, 6'4", 215 pounds, a big wide receiver with a very wide catch radius. I mean, some of the catches that he was able to pull off in college, just search Keon Coleman highlights if you get a chance. This dude is a highlight reel. He reminds me a little bit of like a DeAndre Hopkins, a long, lanky receiver who can make a lot of tough catches in traffic. Keon Coleman, if he's there in round 1, like I said, the Texans have a history of taking wide receivers in the 20s. If he's there at 23, don't be surprised if the Texans draft Keon Coleman. Now, I have my top 5 coming up, but before we get to that, why don't you snag yourself a Texans jersey today with our friends over at Fanatics. Go to chatsports.com/Texans jersey, and you can get any of these jerseys. The Stroud Color Rush is legit. You can get a Will Anderson Battle Red jersey. We love ourselves some Nico Collins as well, and Tank Dell. All these jerseys are available if you go to chatsports.com/Texans jersey. Get it for your loved ones today. Off season just around the corner. Get yourself some Texans gear right now over at chatsports.com/Texans jersey. Now, coming in at number 5 is Troy Fautanu, offensive lineman from Washington. He's a mountain of a man as well. Troy Fautanu is a big guy. And I think, just like I said about Fuaga, if Fautanu is there, which he's been selected in multiple mock drafts for the Houston Texans, a 75 overall grade from PFF, 6'4", 317 pounds. Fautanu could be a guy that the Texans look to add to this offensive line room and could step in day one and be your starting left guard next to either Juice Scruggs or Jarrett Patterson. I would love for the Texans to draft an offensive lineman in the first 3 rounds, and if Fautanu is there in round 1, could make the decision a little bit harder for your Houston Texans. Coming in at number 4 is Quinyon Mitchell, cornerback from Toledo. Now, before the Senior Bowl and before all the pre-draft process started to kind of go off, Quinyon Mitchell was a guy who a lot of people were like, oh, a good upside pick, 2nd or 3rd round guy. Now I think he's a surefire first rounder, if not one of the first guys selected on day 2. Quinyon Mitchell showed out, was arguably one of the best guys at the Senior Bowl this past season. 41 tackles, 1 interception, 18 pass breakups, 6 foot, 196 pounds, is a good physical receiver. If he's there in round 1, adding a guy next to Derek Stingley, Quinyon Mitchell could be an amazing pick for the Houston Texans this season. That's why he comes in at number 4 on my round 1 big board. Now, I talked about offensive line. We just talked about cornerback. What position do you think the Texans draft in round 1? Do you think it's cornerback? Do you think it's wide receiver? Do you think it's O-line? Maybe it's one of these next positions I'm about to talk about. Let me know down in the comment section what you think it'll be. Coming in at number 3, maybe a surprise for a lot of people, is Tyler Nubin, safety from Minnesota. This is another guy. Just like I said about Kamren Kinchens earlier, the safeties are kind of getting disrespected a little bit. And I think Tyler Nubin and Kamren Kinchens are both first-round talents. And if they're both on the board there for the Houston Texans in round 1, why not select your choice of the best safety in the draft? He had 53 tackles, 5 interceptions, 4 pass breakups, has played very well the past couple seasons for Minnesota. 6'2", 210 pounds, great size for a safety. Tyler Nubin, the more I watch this film, the more I fall in love with this guy. This might be a guy who you're like, oh, Jeremy, you have him at number 3 on your big board. I really like this guy as a Houston Texan, as a safety prospect for the Texans. If they're able to get him in round 1, I know some people might be upset with the pick. I, for one, would not. Now, coming in at number 2 is T'Vondre Sweat, defensive tackle for the University of Texas. Obviously, I want the Texans to take a defensive tackle in the first round, and this dude is a mountain of a man. No, this is not a typo. This is his actual height and weight. 6'4", 362 pounds, 45 tackles this season, 2 sacks. This dude is a mountain of a man. If you can get somebody like that, kind of reminds me a little bit of Vita Vea, the defensive tackle from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. An absolute mountain of a man who you have to block him with 2 guys. So that clears up lanes for your linebackers and the rest of your defense so that they're able to get after the quarterback or get after the ball carrier. T'Vondre Sweat, even though he won't put up a lot of numbers, if you draft a guy like this, he could really be the middle of that defense and make it where the other team is having a hard time moving him around to either run the ball or you can free up pass rushers on either side. And number 1 on my big board is Jer'Zhan Newton, defensive tackle from Illinois. I went back and forth between him and Sweat 1 and 2, but I think if one of these 2 guys is on the board, they will be a Houston Texan this year. The Texans need defensive tackle help, and both these guys excelled this past season. Jer'Zhan Newton, 52 tackles, 7.5 sacks. Not as big of a guy as Sweat, but still an amazing defensive tackle. The Texans need that. That is the biggest need for the Texans. And if they're not able to go out and get a free agent like a Chris Jones, a Justin Matabuke, a Christian Wilkins, please, Texans, draft a defensive tackle in the first round of this year's draft. Now, that's all I have for you today. Go follow me on Twitter at Jeremy Chuggs, or make sure to hit that sub button. Go to youtube.com/TexansTV. And actually, I think I have one more question for you folks at home. Let me know down in the comment section before we go to it, actually, too, can we just roll through the big board for everybody? Because I want to kind of go back over everybody that we talked about on today's program. From 15 down to 1, Here is my list. Jackson Powers Johnson, Brian Thomas, Cooper DeJean, Nate Wiggins, Kamren Kinchens, Taliese Fuaga, Jared Verse, Byron Murphy, Laiatu Latu, Keon Coleman. Then we got Troy Fautanu, Quinyon Mitchell, Tyler Nubin, Tavondre Sweat, and Jerzon Newton. That's my big board, so I want you to be honest with me and don't hold back. I want you to tell me your honest opinion. Grade my Texans draft big board. Did I miss somebody big? Are you like, Jeremy, you idiot, you didn't even have this guy on your list? Or why would you have that guy on your list? He doesn't make any sense. Let me know down in the comment section. Grade my big board. Give me an A, B, C, D, or F. And if you could, let me know why you're giving it that grade. Do you think it's great? Do you think it sucks? I'm really interested to see what you have to say down in the comment section.